I can still hear the knife clink against her plate, that tiny sound that sliced right through the polite tension we'd all been tiptoeing around. It was a Saturday dinner at her house, one of those awkward family gatherings I'd gotten used to over the years. She loved hosting, her domain, her table, her unspoken rules tucked into every fork and napkin ring. My husband had insisted it would be good for us, a chance to show off the baby. His words, not mine. Our son was propped in his high chair between us, cheeks pink from teething, eyes drooping from too many new faces cooing at him all afternoon. I'd barely touched my plate. I kept glancing at my husband, hoping he'd see it too, the way she kept looking at the baby, the way her smile curled a little too tightly at the edges, like she was inspecting a product she'd ordered and was deciding if it was worth keeping. We were halfway through the dry roast when she leaned back in her seat, wiped the corner of her mouth with a cloth napkin she'd pressed into crisp squares, and laid her hand on our son's head like she was blessing him. And then she said it. Like it was nothing. Like she was just commenting on the weather. Well, she drawled, her eyes flicking to me and then back to my husband, at least now you have some insurance. He can't leave you now, dear. You've got your hooks in properly. My fork slipped from my hand and hit the edge of my plate with a clang that made my son flinch. My husband cleared his throat, gave a soft laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone else, and stared down at his plate like the gravy stain on his tie was suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. He didn't defend me. Didn't defend us. Didn't even look at me. I felt the heat climb up my neck, the hum of rage mixing with that sharp sting behind my eyes. But my voice, the one I'd always promised myself I'd find when the moment came, got stuck somewhere between my lungs and my lips. I opened my mouth, shut it again. She saw it too. Saw my silence. And she smiled, that slow, cold smile that let me know she'd won, for now. Oh, don't look so sour, she added, waving her hand like she could fan away the sting of her words. It's the truth, sweetheart. You know how these things go. Men need reminders. Ties that bind, so to speak. And he's such a good boy. He'll always do right by you now. For the baby's sake. For the baby's sake. As if he was a bargaining chip. A lock on a door she wanted bolted shut. I looked at my son, his tiny fists gripping the edge of his plastic tray, milk dribbling from the corner of his lip. I wanted to grab him and run right then and there, but instead I sat there and tried to swallow the taste of metal on my tongue. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. She changed the subject to some neighbor's divorce, how messy it was, how it all fell apart once the wife forgot her place. My husband chimed in now and then with a nod, a forced chuckle, a glance at me he couldn't hold for longer than a heartbeat. He didn't touch my hand under the table. He didn't see the way my spine stiffened every time she spoke about how family is everything, when you know how to keep it together. When we finally left, our son dozing in his car seat, my husband muttered that I was reading too much into it, that his mother didn't mean it like that. He said it like a reflex, like he'd been taught his whole life that her words were gospel and any pain they caused was your fault for taking them wrong. But I heard it for what it was, a promise she'd made on his behalf. And in that moment, I felt the first crack split wide open. Not just in him. But in the idea that I'd ever let her hold my child's future in her hand like that again. It's strange how a single sentence can settle into the walls of your house, like a draft you can't shut out no matter how many times you check the windows. That's how her words clung to me in the days after that dinner, drifting through the hall when I nursed my son in the dim light of his nursery, curling around the stove when I reheated leftovers he was too busy to come home and eat. I tried not to think about it the next morning as I stacked dishes into the sink, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind replayed her voice over and over. At least now you have some insurance. I wondered if she'd said it before, if she'd whispered it into his ear years ago when we first started talking about trying for a baby, planting seeds in soil she thought she'd get to harvest one day. He acted like nothing had happened. That night, after we got back from her house, he'd kissed my cheek the way you'd pat a dog you're half annoyed with. He carried our son to bed, humming the same tune his mother used to sing to him. Then he came to our room and fell asleep with his back turned, as if the conversation around that dinner table had never scraped raw at all the parts of me I'd trusted him to protect. The next evening, I tried. I really tried. We sat on the sofa, our son snoring soft baby breaths in the bassinet by the window. I asked him if he understood why it hurt me, the way she said it, the way he laughed instead of stopping her. He shifted on the cushion, drummed his fingers on his knee like he couldn't wait for me to finish. "Babe, she's old school," he said finally, his voice drifting into that familiar sigh that always made me feel like the problem was mine. "You know how she is. She didn't mean anything by it. She was probably just trying to say, you know, he ties us together. Family. Family." The word tasted sour in my mouth. I wanted him to see the difference between love and leverage, but the more I spoke, the more his eyes slid away from mine. He promised he'd talk to her, but there was no promise in the way he said it, just a rehearsed line that might have soothed me once, back when I thought a baby would fix the cracks I pretended weren't there. I waited for him to pull me in, to tell me she was wrong, that our son wasn't a bargaining chip between me and a mother who wanted her hooks sunk deep in every choice we made. But all I got was a dismissive pat on my knee. "Don't let it get to you, okay? You've got to stop being so sensitive about what she says. She just wants what's best for us." What's best for us? I wondered if he even knew what that meant anymore, or if he'd let her define it so many times that the word us didn't really include me at all. I sat there long after he'd gone to bed, the hum of the baby monitor filling the silence. I wanted to believe him, I really did. I wanted to believe this was just a misunderstanding, a slip of her sharp tongue. But the more I turned it over in my mind, the more I knew what it really was, a reminder. A line she drew in the air, right there in her dining room, that told me exactly where she stood. And worse, it told me exactly where he stood too. When our son stirred in the bassinet, I went to him, pressing my lips to his warm forehead, breathing in that sweet, milky smell that felt like the only true thing left. He was not my insurance. He was my heartbeat, my reason. And if they thought I'd let him become her pawn, our pawn, they hadn't learned a damn thing about me yet. The thing about trust is that once it cracks, you start seeing through everything you used to paint over. That was me, 2 nights after that dinner, lying awake in the quiet hum of the nursery, my baby's tiny size the only honest thing in the whole house. My husband's arm draped across my side like an anchor, but it didn't feel steady, it felt heavy, like something holding me in place when my instincts were screaming to run. It started with a bill I found tucked under the stack of junk mail on the hall table, an envelope with his name and hers, a business name I didn't recognize, numbers I couldn't make sense of. I stood there in the hallway, rocking the baby's carrier with my foot, my heart drumming so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into a piece of paper just like he always said I did. But that comment, insurance, echoed so loud it drowned out every excuse. When he fell asleep, I slipped from the bed and sat on the living room floor. I spread out the bills like puzzle pieces, tracing lines with my finger in the hush of the TV's blue glow. A loan here. A withdrawal there. Transfers from accounts he'd asked me to sign when I was still half groggy from giving birth. My name was everywhere, and yet nowhere I really understood. It didn't make sense until I found the messages on his old laptop, the one he thought I'd forgotten the password to. It took me 3 tries. I wished it had taken more. The texts between him and his mother weren't full of sweet plans about our son's first birthday or photos of the nursery we'd painted together at 3 in the morning when I was too pregnant to sleep. No, they were lists. Plans. Numbers. She doesn't need to know the details yet, his mother had written in one thread that made my stomach clench so hard I thought I'd be sick right there on the floor. She'll stay. The baby will keep her here if she gets cold feet. You know that. Once we get the second account finalized, we're set. I read it over and over until the words blurred. Second account. Set. The baby wasn't just a grandchild to her, he was a lock on a door she'd never wanted me to open in the first place. The final link in a chain she'd been forging from the moment we said I do, or maybe before that. I didn't know how deep it went. I just knew the truth now: she didn't see me as family. I was the liability. My son, our son, was the collateral. When I closed the laptop, the house felt unfamiliar. The living room where we'd spent nights feeding each other takeout on the floor after we first moved in. The hallway where he'd pressed his hands to my belly, feeling the baby kick for the first time, promising me we'd always be a team. The bedroom where he lay sleeping, his mouth slack, his arm draped over my pillow as if he had nothing to hide. It all looked like a set now, pretty walls around a story that wasn't mine anymore. I went to the nursery and sat by the crib, watching my baby's chest rise and fall. He was the only real thing in this house built on soft lies. I touched his tiny hand, felt his fingers curl around mine like he knew exactly what I needed. He'd trust me long before he trusted them, that was my promise to him. He was never going to be their leverage, their pawn, their insurance. He was my son. And if they wanted to play games with paper and whispered debts, they could. But they'd have to go through me to touch him again. I stayed there until the sun cracked open the night, holding his hand, and letting the lie die quietly in my chest. By the time my husband stirred, I already knew what I'd do next. They could keep their secrets. I had mine now, too, and mine was freedom. I didn't plan some grand showdown. That's not how real betrayals unravel. They slip out in the middle of everyday moments, when you're so tired you could drop, but the rage inside you keeps you upright. It was late afternoon when I finally cornered him. The baby was down for a nap, the monitor humming softly on the coffee table. He was pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, whispering just low enough that I knew exactly who he was talking to. His mother's name sat oily on his tongue. Yeah, Mom. No, she doesn't know anything. Don't worry. I stood there, arms crossed, my heart pounding in that steady, traitorous way that made me feel 17 again, the girl who believed love meant trusting someone to hold the map when you closed your eyes. But I was done closing my eyes. When he hung up, he jumped a little, seeing me in the doorway. Hey, babe. You want to order in tonight? You look tired. That was the worst part, the casual charm, the small talk, the gentle voice that used to talk me off cliffs but now just made the ground feel like it was crumbling under my feet. I didn't answer. I walked over to the coffee table and set down the printouts, bank transfers, text logs, the photocopy of that business loan in my name. His eyes darted to the baby monitor and back to me, like he was calculating how loud he'd have to lie to make this go away. What's all this? He asked, voice too bright. You tell me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The silence pressed down harder than any scream could have. He let out a half laugh, scratched the back of his neck. You've been going through my stuff? Jesus, babe, what's gotten into you? You're acting paranoid. This is nothing. It's family business. My mother's just trying to help us get stable again, you know that. There it was, just family. Just help. Just one more lie wrapped in a word that was supposed to feel safe. You told her our son was insurance, I said flatly. His mouth opened but no words came out. I watched his face shift, the flicker of guilt, then the flash of anger that came when he realized charm wasn't enough. You let her say it. You laughed. You let her turn my baby into a leash for your mother's money. Did you think I'd never find out? It's not like that. It's exactly like that, I cut in, and my voice didn't shake. I felt it then, the steel running through my bones. You think I'm going to sit here and let you and your mother use my child as your bargaining chip? You think I'm too stupid to see you signed my name to loans that prop up her failing business? You've been lying to me for years, haven't you? One favor at a time. He slammed his hand on the table, the paper sliding to the floor. I did it for us. For you. We needed that money. You wouldn't understand, you never understand. She's helping us. That's what family does. No, I said. That's what control looks like. And you let her do it. You let her look me in the eye and tell me my baby was insurance. He took a step closer, and for a second I thought he might touch my arm, try to drag me back under that warm blanket of excuses. But I stepped back. The space between us felt like freedom. You're not going to do anything stupid, right? He said, softer now. Asterisk, you wouldn't break this up over paperwork. Over money. Over her. We have a family. I almost laughed. No. I have a family. He's asleep in that crib right now. And he's the only part worth saving. He tried to say my name, but I was already done listening. I picked up the baby monitor, held it to my chest like a shield. I'll do whatever I have to do to make sure he grows up knowing he's not anyone's insurance. Not yours. Not hers. You don't get to decide that anymore. When I turned away, he didn't follow. He just stood there, staring at the papers he thought would stay buried forever, the mask slipping, the truth wide open in the too bright light of our living room. And in that silence, I felt something stronger than anger, resolve. I didn't leave that night, not physically, anyway. I stayed because that's how you survive people like him and her. You don't run when they're looking for proof you're unstable, emotional, unfit. You stay calm. You stay polite. You play the part they wrote for you, right until you flip the final page. So that night, I tucked my baby into his crib like nothing had changed, even though everything had. I watched him sleep under the soft yellow lamp, his tiny fist curled near his cheek, his lashes fluttering against his rosy skin. I felt the weight of what I was about to do press into my ribs, but it didn't crush me. It braced me. He hovered at the doorway like he thought he still had a claim on this scene. We'll fix this, he said softly, voice like sugar melting in tea. You don't have to overreact. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. I just looked at him and smiled, that tight, tired smile I'd seen in my own mother's mirror when she used to practice her everything's fine face. I know, I lied. I'm just tired. Let's not fight anymore tonight. When he finally fell asleep, his phone charging on the nightstand like always, I sat cross-legged on the floor by the crib with my father's old leather folder in my lap. He'd given it to me the week before I got married. He wasn't much for speeches, my dad, but he'd squeezed my hands and said, "Don't ever sign anything you don't read twice. Don't ever trust anyone with your child's safety but yourself." Back then, I'd laughed. I'd thought he was just an old man who didn't understand that love was different now, that it was modern, equal, honest. But he'd seen things I hadn't. He'd seen people like my mother-in-law turn family into a business, children into investments. Inside the folder was the old contact card for his lawyer, a woman named Iris, with a fierce red pen signature that bled right through the heavy paper. I dialed her number the next morning, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my phone twice. She answered on the third ring, her voice calm and steady in a way that made my throat ache with relief. "How soon can we meet?" I asked, not caring that my husband might hear from the next room. I need to know what my options are. For me. And for my son. Iris didn't flinch. She asked for details, bank accounts, the forged forms, the debts hidden under my name. She asked the questions no one else would. Is there any risk to you staying in that house? Do you have a safe place to go if you need to? I told her about the savings account my father left me, the one I'd kept hidden even when my husband teased me for being paranoid. She told me it was enough to get started, to cover rent somewhere else if I needed to go fast. That afternoon, I packed a small bag for the baby and hid it in the trunk of my car. Diapers, formula, his softest blanket, the faded stuffed bear my dad bought him when he was born. Every time I walked past the hallway mirror, I checked my face, calm, calm, calm. I knew I couldn't slip, couldn't let him see how close I was to disappearing right out from under him. That night, he kissed my cheek like nothing had changed, like he still believed he could hold this together with a few sweet words and a lie or two. But I was done believing. He didn't know it yet, but I was already gone, at least the part of me he'd thought he owned. I watched my baby breathe in his sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling like a promise. No one was ever going to use him as insurance again. And neither was I. The morning I finally left, the house was so quiet I could almost hear my heartbeat echo against the walls. He'd gone to the office early, acting like things were normal, as if my calm smile these past few days meant his charm had worked again. That was his mistake, he'd always confused my silence with surrender. I held my son on my hip as I moved from room to room, packing the last things that mattered. The quilt my father's mother made for me when I was born. The framed picture of my dad holding me, his big calloused hand cradling my newborn head like it was something precious. My baby's favorite toy bear, worn from nights he'd clutched it so tight he'd wake with the fur imprinted on his cheeks. I didn't touch the piles of bills on the hall table. Or the folders with their hidden debts, their forged lines. Those would stay behind, the weight he thought would keep me shackled forever. I'd let the lawyer sort that out, piece by piece. Paperwork could be fought over. But I wouldn't fight for a house built on false promises, no matter how many memories we'd made here. When my bag was packed, I paused in the doorway of the nursery. The walls were still that soft green I'd painted myself, rolling the color on late into the night while my baby kicked inside me. I'd believed this room would be his safe place, the start of our story. Now I saw it for what it was, for walls that couldn't hold back the poison dripping in through every crack they'd carved around us. I kissed my son's warm forehead. He gurgled awake, his tiny hand batting at my hair. I whispered the promise that I'd been stitching together piece by piece ever since she called him insurance. No one will ever own you, little man. Not even me. You are free. Always. When I carried him out to the car, the sun was just cresting the roofs, the street empty and hushed. I buckled him in with trembling fingers, my breath fogging up the window as I leaned my forehead to the glass. This wasn't the life I'd planned when I said I do. But for the first time since then, I felt like I was saying it again, to myself. I do. I do promise to protect you. I do promise to never be her. I do promise to never let him choose her over you. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe him that. He could figure out where I'd gone when the lawyer called to explain the papers I'd filed, the restraining order, the custody plan that gave me everything, the one thing I'd never give up again. I drove to the small apartment I'd found on the edge of town, the one with peeling paint and a rickety porch but a view of the sunrise that made me feel like maybe the world wasn't so heavy after all. Iris had already dropped off the keys in a plain envelope, no questions asked, no lectures about what I should have seen coming. She just told me, "You did good. You did brave." The first night, I lay awake on a second-hand mattress, my baby curled against my chest, listening to the new sounds, the hum of distant traffic, the creak of the floorboards settling under our weight. No marble countertops. No mother-in-law's voice threading its way through every conversation like barbed wire. No more pretending. In the morning, I stood at the window, my baby babbling at my feet. I pressed my palm to the glass, feeling the cold and the light all at once. I could see the world again, raw, uncertain, but mine to shape. And his. Always his. He would grow up knowing he was loved for who he was, not what he could hold over someone else's head. No barbed words. No invisible chains disguised as family. My mother-in-law could keep her insurance. My husband could keep his spineless excuses. I'd keep my son. And I'd keep this fragile, fierce piece of freedom we'd carved out for ourselves.